Well, welcome to the brand new streaming Star Wars, complete with additional overlays that don't need to be there when we come in. How's it going, Nick? Great to see you, man.
Good evening, sir. How are you?
I am pretty good. It's a Friday night. I'm hanging out talking Star Wars with a good friend. Can't really beat that. It's hard to beat, man. So thank you for joining us. Cheers to you. Let's start off with the old streaming Star Wars
Absolutely.
tradition. Cheers. There you go. If you
Cheers.
drink them, if you got them, join us in partaking in some. I'm drinking some brown liquor tonight. So
As am I. As per my usual brand, whiskey and ice gets the job done.
it gets the job done. So hey, man, we are doing streaming Star Wars, which I need to give props to my good friend Dave Amilati, who he and I started the show. I don't even know, like 2 years ago, maybe. I don't know. Whenever it was, we did it, and it was a ton of fun. And well, the Book of Boba Fett just kind of felt like it was the right time to bring this show back, especially in light of the new combination of Around the Galaxy and Podcast of the Wills that we're bringing together on ATG Cast. How you feeling about doing streaming Star Wars?
This is one of those things. Like, I made this joke a couple times along the way. I was on Bro Axiom a couple months ago, and I said it felt like I was finally invited to host Saturday Night Live. When you get to hang out with that crew on Sunday night, you've kind of made the big time. Streaming Star Wars is another one of those great ones. I watched almost all those episodes that you guys did back then, and I loved the show. I loved the format. I loved the conversations. And as I watched it, I thought, these are the kinds of shows that I want to do as I was doing Podcast of the Wills, but in a different way than I'm doing it now. So it was another aspirational, like, I love that kind of show. I want to do a show like that. And now here I am doing it with you. So I'm living the dream, as they say.
No, it's awesome. I'm excited to have you. For people who may not be familiar with streaming Star Wars, sort of the overall sort of approach to the show is that we talk about the news of the week. We'll hit all the Star Wars news, but most of it's going to be about some of the streaming shows coming off Disney Plus. There's so many conversations, and look, we don't intend to be that late, that early breaker first review. You're not going to probably see us doing reaction videos, but we want to talk about all the great things that are happening in the Star Wars universe, Star Wars world. We've been doing a show on the ATG Cast stream for a while that we call Disturbances in the Force, which is a little 5-minute Star Wars news digest. And what we're going to do is we want to incorporate that here so that we can start with the news and then get to the conversation. So what do you think, Nick? Should we do the news? All right. Well, another week, another flood of news, rumors, clickbait, and conversation. This is Pete Fletzer, and welcome to Disturbances in the Force. So while a sequel to the EA Spawn Jedi Fallen Order has not been officially announced, it's been a long-suspected project on the horizon. And this week, VentureBeat reporter Jeffrey Grubb shared that his sources tell him that Jedi Fallen Order number 2 will be announced before E3 2022 Electronic Arts Showcase in June. In addition to the game being announced in a few short months, Grubb also thinks that the game could be available before the end of this year. There's still no official word from Lucasfilm Games or Disney regarding the title at this time. In other news, Christina Ariel hosted the 1-year anniversary celebration of the High Republic series of books and comics with a show on the StarWars.com this week that featured authors Daniel Jose Older, Claudia Gray, Kevin Scott, Charles Soule, and Justina Ireland. During the episode of the High Republic show, it was revealed that Phase 2 of the project will take place about 150 years before the events of Phase 1, which started with Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule at the beginning of 2021. This time frame will put the High Republic back 350 years before the events of The Phantom Menace. Several new authors were revealed, as well as some top-secret projects by existing contributors. The second phase of the High Republic is set to kick off in April 2022. Well, the fan movement Blackout Star Wars Eclipse has reactivated early on Friday in response to the Lucasfilm Games decision to work with the controversial game studio Quantic Dream. The French game studio was founded by David Cage, a CEO with a history of allegations ranging from misogyny and homophobia to a toxic work environment. Fans, led by Pink Milk podcast Brian Barry, have taken to social media using the hashtag Blackout Star Wars Eclipse to express their dissatisfaction with the Lucasfilm Games decision to work with the notorious game maker. And just as an FYI, ATG Cast will not be covering any news or rumors regarding this game as long as David Cage is involved. Well, this week, Chapter 2 of the Book of Boba Fett dropped, and it was called The Tribes of Tatooine, and it featured the resolution of the titular character's arc with the Tusken Raiders, while introducing an antagonist to the show's current timeline in the form of Jabba the Hutt's twin cousins. It also introduced a number of Easter eggs for fans of deleted scenes and comic books and other Star Wars media. And while the show opened with some mixed reviews from the broader entertainment media, according to Deadline.com, Samba TV has estimated that more than 1.7 million people streamed the first episode of the show in its opening 5 days, and that beats the most recent Disney Plus streaming franchise series Hawkeye by nearly 200,000 viewers. In their New York Times article that dropped before the Book of Boba Fett premiere 2 weeks ago, they stated that Dave Filoni was credited as a writer on the Book of Boba Fett. And this is not surprising at all, of course, because he's been credited as a writer on Clone Wars, Rebels, and Bad Batch, and his writing credits on The Mandalorian include 2 episodes that introduce some key characters, including the Gunslinger episode that introduced Fennec Shand, and he also wrote the Jedi episode, which made Rosario Dawson's arrival of the animated favorite Ahsoka Tano, brought her to live action. There's no information about which chapter he wrote for the Book of Boba Fett until now. According to Direct.com, Filoni has written episode number 6, which is the second to the last of this season of the Book of Boba Fett. And in a recent interview with Hollywood Reporter, Tamora Morrison and Ming-Na Wen talked about working together, and at one point, the Fennec Shand actress had to shut down Tamora, saying that he was about to say, yeah, we've got some good stuff coming up. Ooh, wait till episode 7. Wow. So between comments like this from the cast and showrunner Robert Rodriguez promising that the show over-delivers, fan excitement remains at a fever pitch. Well, that wraps it up for this week's Disturbances in the Force. Make sure to check out the ATG Cast podcast stream for weekly one-on-one interviews with the people behind the fandom. This Tuesday, Around the Galaxy is joined by YouTuber and fan film critic Kyle Katarn. So please subscribe for regular updates. Follow us on all your social media channels at ATGcast and visit our website at atgcast.com to keep up with us, find our merch, and get information about supporting the show as an ATG patron. Thank you so much for listening, and may the Force be with you. So that's the news wrap up, man. There it is. There
it is. Like a true news pro. In fact, there was a comment that I need to find. It said Pete should be reading Disturbances in the Force with a mid-Atlantic accent like a 1920s radio news reporter. I agree, Brian. I definitely think that would work well.
Mr. and Mrs. America and all the ships at sea.
Speaking of the chat, I want to shout out. We've got a bunch of friends watching in the chat right now, hanging out. We are excited that everybody is here, that you're spending some time with us on Friday night. I hope everybody has drinks, whatever makes you happy and comfortable and relaxed on a Friday, to hang out, talk Boba Fett, talk streaming Star Wars. If you get a chance, throw the link to the feed in your Twitter feed, send it out. Let's get some more friends in here hanging out and talking to us. There was one other important comment, and now I feel like I've lost it. Well, Michael Nip said, Nick 3 nights a week is what the people deserve.
It's true.
I don't know what we're punishing them for, but I also don't disagree. And then Matthew said Nick is at least back in full beard mode. So yes, I also agree wholeheartedly with that.
I'm not going to lie. I'm glad to see it back. I'm glad to see it back.
It is good to be back, but it's good to be with all our friends hanging out tonight. And it's good to be able to talk Book of Boba Fett. And, just there's a lot going on right now in Star Wars.
I mean, it really is a crazy time. And, it's funny. Nick and I talk quite regularly during the week. And I was putting together the news and I said, boy, it's been kind of a quiet news week. And then bam, 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 all this stuff hit. And it seems that Star Wars doesn't slow down when the series drops. And we had the second episode already of Book of Boba Fett. We're 2 in, and before I get your thoughts on it, we ran a little Twitter poll, and I want to share a little bit of that. So we asked the good people of the Twitterverse, what did they think of this episode of Book of Boba Fett, episode number 2, chapter 2? Was it better than the first? Was it the same as the first? Was it not as good as the first? And overwhelmingly, people seem to like this episode much better. And then the other question that I asked, that we asked, was, did chapter 2 of the Book of Boba Fett change your opinion of the series? And interestingly, a lot of people were already all in, and I don't know how much of that has to do with the fact that it's a new Star Wars show and we're going to watch it no matter what. I do feel like there's a bit of that, but I was actually surprised to see that 41%. Now, this was over 300 people that filled out this poll in 24 hours. 41% of people said they're more excited now after this particular episode. Nick, what was your take on the episode?
I have to admit that I was a little bit on board with the people that were even more excited. Of course, you and I talked during the week in text and that kind of thing, but kind of my general mood coming out of last week was by no means that I disliked it. I was a little bit underwhelmed after the first watch. And I think that actually is attributed to exactly what you talked about. Robert Rodriguez said in print, we're going to blow everybody's minds. We're going to exceed expectations. And knowing that smart people and media people don't let people say those kinds of things, the fact that it made it to print meant like, I bought into that hype a little bit. So of course that carried me into that first episode. But upon a second viewing, upon, one smart person on Twitter somewhere going, dude, it's a prelude. Like, there's 6 more episodes to come. I settled in and went, well, of course I didn't dislike it. But watching this one on Wednesday did make me even more excited for the series going forward.
I do have to say, and I think this was one of the challenges, and this was part of the review that I put in my Fantha Tracks review last week, was I think coming out of Mandalorian with whether it was the Grogu reveal, which will never be topped. Well, never say never. I never thought we would top the I am your father, but there we are. But even the first episode of the second season of Mandalorian, which brought back Cobb Vanth and the Boba Fett armor, and then ended with Boba Fett watching the Mandalorian disappear into the sunset. There was none of that at all with this episode. There was nothing. The first episode, there was nothing that was kind of that set the internet on fire. And I think with the second episode, that was where you had really your first reveal. I mean, to see the Hutts, to see some of the Boba Fett in action, and to all the great stuff that we saw from the flashbacks, that had a lot more of the callbacks and the fan service, but in a really positive way. And I would recommend, I don't know if you got a chance to do this or not, but last night in preparation for the show, put the kids to bed, grabbed my drink, put on the headphones, sat in the family room with the big TV, and I watched episode 1 and 2 together as one episode.
Okay.
And honestly, it feels like it's one 90-minute movie, because it really takes that arc. And I think that's one of the things that was so satisfying about this second episode. And we'll talk some of the details, some of the things that blew us away about it. But I think the reason it worked was because the arc was completed. It went from made it out of the Sarlacc pit, became essentially a prisoner of the Tusken Raiders, earned the respect, showed the tribe that he was there to support them, and then he gains full acceptance. That's your full arc. And you didn't get that in the first episode. So when you walked off the first episode, you were like, where's the thing? Where's the big
you're
piece?
waiting for the next part. I can totally understand that. Well, and I want to pull up one of these comments that relates to the Twitter poll and what we kind of start out with, from our good friend Danny. Danny said, honestly, I'm having a hard time getting into Book of Boba Fett. She said, I haven't really rated anything higher than a 7. And even my worst episode of Mando was a 7.5. Here's what I want to say. And this is kind of what you and I talked about before we came on air tonight, is that's a perfectly legitimate opinion to have, Danny. And I agree with you. I think I came out of the first episode and I was kind of like a 6 or a 10. It didn't mean I hated it, but we're allowed to be constructively critical of things. And there's a comment that she made as a follow-up that I think we'll talk about a little bit more later. But she said, my issue is everything kind of feels like inside baseball, especially for books and comic fans. I feel like I should know things that I don't, so it feels like it's going over my head. And we're going to circle back to that in a little bit. But I did want to bring up that, it's okay for us to be a little uncertain. It's something new. We all have expectations. But I think that that's totally fair. And I love the idea that you said of it feeling more complete, putting the first and second episodes together.
Yeah, it's a fun way to watch it, and I think, even when I went back and started watching some of Mando, in preparation for Book of Boba Fett, I think a lot of
Hmm.
people did the rewatch. It does feel a little bit more complete. You don't rea and I think Book of Boba Fett so far, and this kind of we'll end up talking a little bit more about in the prediction section of our show, but it definitely feels like a book, like in the
Right.
classic sense. Like I feel like I am literally reading chapters of a book. You start with one scene and then you get, some background and then you move the story forward a little bit. And what's interesting is how little of the current story we really have. We have like
Hmm.
virtually, I mean, I haven't done the math, but of the 90 minutes we've gotten so far, I'd say maybe 15 at max have been focused on where Boba and Fennec are today. So
Correct.
that's so. What were some of the things that stood out to you in this particular episode?
Um, I have to say the big thing that stood out to me the most, the big thing that I loved the most was the Tuscan story arc.
Hmm.
Um, of course, we loved the reveal of Black Chrysanthemum. We liked seeing the Hut show up, some very classic Star Wars things. But for me, the emotional aspects of that Tuscan story arc, and honestly, I kind of said last week as I was watching the first episode, I wasn't sure that I wanted or cared to have an emotionally developed Boba Fett.
Hmm.
And that sounds kind of weird to say because I also didn't want him to just be a mindless killer, which
Right.
is ironic because that's what we've said that the Tuscans were for the last 42 years.
True.
Um, but in this episode, and of course, what they're tying in with the flashbacks to him as a kid. And I loved last week. One of the big wows last week was the flashback to him holding Django's helmet in the
Yeah.
middle of that Geonosian arena. Um, I'm really here for an emotionally developed Boba Fett, and especially looking at trauma because we all,
Yeah.
in real life deal with issues of trauma and some of that kind of stuff. And so narratively, they're looking at that. I love the commentary on Native and Indigenous peoples. Like it really is some powerful storytelling that, while is fun for our space adventure, has a real one-to-one connection to the world that we live in. And I think I appreciate that Disney and, especially the creators of this particular story are making those choices.
It's funny because I think one of the things that I saw, one of the comments on one of the thousands of comments on Twitter was, somebody commented on the fact that the Tuscans were shown to be so brutal and so frankly just just animalistic and evil in Attack of the Clones, right? I mean, they stole Shmi, they
Hmm.
literally murdered Anakin's mother, and now we're trying to get to a point where we're feeling some sort of remorse and some sort of empathy for them as a tribe, or as a people. And there have always been fan theories, and it's an interesting fan theory about somehow they were manipulated by the dark side to pull Anakin over the edge. But I don't even think it's so much. I mean, I think we need to get comfortable, and this is a probably a very touchy subject in many cases, but we need to get comfortable with the fact that they are an indigenous people who are a culture that's based on violence,
Hmm.
and I don't know about based on violence, but certainly not afraid to attack and to be violent when they feel like they're being invaded. And
Hmm.
so I think I think that's something that I'd like people to get comfortable with. Is it's not just, yeah, they may have not been manipulated by the dark side. They may
Right.
have been really pissed off that the Lars family put a plantation right in the
Hmm.
middle of their land, and they're going to respond to that.
That's right. When you look at, and of course you can draw, I actually thought there were a lot of really neat historical contextual tie-ins to, again, the Native Americans in this country that we live in. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, there's stories of when the first rail lines were going from the east to the west and they were riding through those Native American territories.
Mhm.
It was a feature on a lot of those passenger train rides that rifles were handed out and people were allowed to shoot buffaloes out the window
Yeah.
as they drove through some of those states. And they didn't stop and collect the buffaloes, they just kept going. And
Right.
while that's not exactly what was happening in this episode, we get people shooting out of a train, shooting banthas,
Yeah.
shooting, natives as they pass through. And it was a defensive thing, but there's still a one-to-one correlation to some of that. But also the assimilation and the change, whether it be good or bad. We, in this country, with the Native Americans, the introduction of whiskey to the Native American culture has had a long, difficult history ever since people back in the 1800s introduced that. Cars, those indigenous people here were given new things. And we see that in this episode. We see them talking to Boba, and Boba saying, you have weapons, and now they have speeder bikes, and now they have, the deal that was struck with the Pikes.
Yep.
About paying passage so that they could come through. That happens in that time with Boba, but we see it again later with Mando, because Mando pays them the goggles so that he gets passage through when he's with Toro Calican. And that whole, it changes the culture and it creates a new way forward so that people can evolve, because prior to that, that was all they knew, was to raid and kill and be defensive, if nothing else. So I think it's a really great storytelling arc in order to tie in, something that we're very familiar with, and to see that also develop Boba. Boba becomes accepted into that culture.
Yeah, I'm going to throw another comment out there that's related in that there's a lot of commentary that that Boba, this isn't the Boba Fett that I expected. Of course, I mean, it's similar to The Last Jedi. This isn't my Luke Skywalker. This isn't my Boba Fett. But if you go back, and again, in preparation for the show, I looked up which were the Boba Fett episodes from Clone Wars. And even as a child, he always stuck to his word. He always felt a certain moral obligation to do what he said he would do, and also not do what wasn't necessary to do the job. I mean, when they tried to kill Mace Windu, you got to kind of understand that revenge, right? I mean, he literally watched this guy chop his dad's head off. You can understand the revenge motivation, but when it meant taking out other people, he was not comfortable with that. And then he made a commitment to finish the job when he was part of a train heist. Similarly, it wasn't a train heist, but it was I guess it kind of was a train heist with the
I know exactly
slave
which
girl.
one you're talking about.
But he made the commitment. I'm gonna see this through, and he did. And he did the same thing when he found Mando and Grogu. He made the deal. I'm going to, in exchange for my armor, I will make sure that Grogu gets to where he needs to be, and followed through. And this is why when he says, I'm going to rule with respect versus fear, it's already been a part of his core.
For sure. And that I think also circles back to what I said initially in the first episode, was I didn't know how emotionally developed of a Boba Fett I wanted, because the only Boba Fett I had gotten prior to this, for the most part, was bounty hunter, one-liners, he's no good to me dead, those kinds of things. And Andy said it up here in the chat just a minute ago. He said the trouble is that Boba hype is tough to meet. What do we really need to know about Boba that isn't better than the image I have him in my head? Sprinkling him through Mando season 2 was perfect. And so that's the thing. It's going to hit fans of a certain age a certain way, because you and I and Andy grew up with that, 6 minutes of screen time, 6 lines, whatever it is, Boba Fett. But other people grew up with Clone Wars Boba Fett, just like you're describing, and they got him more as a kid and have a different connection. So I really am excited to see that development, and I think it's going to lead us in some areas that I was more interested in than initially when we were told, hey, we're going to get a Boba Fett series.
And I think it's interesting too, the evolution of a storytelling process, right? I think there was a lot of talk that the Kenobi series was going to be a film, and the Boba Fett series was going to be a film. To be able to do it over 7 parts, to do it in what will end up being probably somewhat around 5 hours, gives you a lot more of that room. And you can't do 6 weeks or 7 weeks of go on a mission, kill, go to the next thing, and that would get boring. It's the same kind of mentality of people who want to see a Darth Vader series where he's just a badass and kills everybody. That's boring. That's video game. It's a lot of fun to play as a video game. I mean, the Bounty Hunter video game was, as Jango Fett, was fun. But if you can't get invested in a character that way, and there was a funny little cartoon that was up on I posted on Twitter, but they were like, character is interesting, and he's got we saw him on screen, and the Sarlacc pit will digest you for 1,000 years unless you're an interesting character, in which case we're going to bring you back, or marketable. And it does bring to mind a really interesting question: is this an easy marketing opportunity for Disney?
Right.
Like, what drove it, right? Because we know that the reason the Mandalorian was created was because they said, no, you can't do Boba Fett.
Right.
So they created a Boba Fett like character. Well,
Mm-hmm.
now they have Boba Fett. They see that these work. What are we going to get from this, and where's this all going to go? And that's, I think, it's a very valid question. What are we supposed to get from this show? It's a group,
Well,
something
and
that I
I
think we
want to
thought
pull
about.
up. Yeah, well, and I want to pull up what Phoenix Nightflame said. He said, to be honest, they said Star Wars might be better suited for the small screen. It allows for time to expand and explore the characters. The sequel trilogy only had maybe 7 hours for how many characters? Book of Boba Fett has 5+ hours for one. And that's an excellent point. And that's something, I was on a show Tuesday night, shout out to my friends at the Deucecast Extra, talking about Book of Boba Fett. And that was the question I posed, because those guys are all hardcore cinema movie buff people. And so I asked that question. I said, if the future of Star Wars was only streaming series where you get to have these big expansions, somebody, the article came out, I think last week, comparing it to, a 6-hour movie. And is that really, 6-hour movies in chunks, which you kind of said the first 2 episodes were like a good, movie arc. So I asked them, especially as hardcore cinema folks, what does that do for you? And what they said, and I agree with, is there's potential there, but it loses that key thing, which is the communal experience, the opportunity to have a I am your father moment in a theater with a bunch of people for the first time. To have the Avengers Endgame, big reveal, or all the women heroes showing, those stand up and cheer moments. We had some in Far From Home or No Way Home a couple weeks back. So the communal part of that, and Star Wars is nothing if not about community. Speaking of community, if you're watching the live chat, grab the link, tweet it out, share it with your friends. We'd love some more folks to jump in here and join this conversation with us. But I think that's a great question. And you talk about marketing. I think one of the true tests, and you and I have both said this in regards to our fathers. Our fathers are watching these shows. My mother has started watching Star Wars shows because of Baby Yoda. Baby Yoda brought her in. And after the first episode of Book of Boba Fett, my dad texted me and said, I really liked that. Also, I like that it's bringing your mother into Star Wars. So from a marketing standpoint, most of the people that are going to get hooked on these things are not as deep of a level of fans as you and I are.
Yes.
But that's what's showing, and reporting those numbers, like you said, of how it's being viewed is telling that it's working.
It is working. But you do bring up a great point, and Danny brought it up in her comment, and let's get to that. With this episode, more so than the first one. I mean, the first one didn't really have anything. I mean, it had a variation on the expected story of Boba breaking out of the Sarlacc pit, and from there. But this episode had, not only did it have reference to a comic book character, this Black Chrysanthemum.
There he is right there.
It also had reference to a deleted scene with Cammy and Fixer, which how did they find people? Are those like, is that deep fake? I don't understand. Like, it looks, the actors they got there were fantastic, but
they did a great job.
You also got the Pikes, which come from Solo. And it's funny, I was talking to a friend of mine who's kind of a Star Wars fan. He's like, oh, that's right, I forgot all about Solo. So the question that I posed to you and to the people watching and listening, what is the impact of other media here now in Star Wars? What does this mean that you can get a comic book character? This is, I think, is this the first time we've seen a comic book character come to life on screen?
I think it is, and that was a question that I've heard posed on a couple of different shows earlier this week. Is that, yes, as you know, Cobb Vanth was the first,
right? He was from Chuck Wendig's book,
character, right? From the Aftermath books, he was the first original novel character to be introduced. I mean, technically, Thrawn was introduced into animation before that, and that would have. But I think in live action, I think Cobb Vanth is the first. So yeah, I think as far as I understand it, Black Chrysanthemum, Santi, Black K, depending on if you're an Afro reader or not, I think that character is the first comic book to live action translation, which is neat. But as we said, when I watched it Wednesday morning the first time, actually, really, when I watched it the second time, because I watched it at 2:00 when it dropped. No, I didn't. I watched it early with my daughter. The first week I stayed up. I can't do that every week.
It's hard to do.
It's very hard to do. But I didn't know that was a comic book character when I watched it the first time. I was like, oh, that's a cool looking Wookiee.
Yeah.
And then like at 10:00 in the morning, and I was at work and checking Twitter at some point, and somebody was like, I can't believe they did that. And I was like, oh crap, I missed something. What do I? And so I'm not a comic book reader, and you're not a comic book reader.
No, I'm not.
So I knew who Cammy and Fixer were because I grew up with the original trilogy, and those deleted scenes are from lore. But it's an interesting thing, and I sympathize with Danny, especially on that point of how much am I missing? And I feel like in this case, at this point, I think we got what we needed.
Yeah.
Because I don't know anything about Black K, and if he's going to show up in more of this, they're going to give me what I need. And it speaks to, and you've talked about this a lot before, Filoni and Favreau in particular are really good at weaving in some of that kind of stuff, but it's still being accessible to people who have no familiarity. Like, I don't feel like I'm missing anything seeing that. The other example I use is when my dad called me after the Ahsoka episode of Mando season 2.
Yep.
He said, I really liked that Jedi with the 2 lightsabers. She was cool.
Right.
And that was all he had to say.
Yep.
But he had everything he needed to know. He didn't know what I knew, but it didn't hurt his viewing of the rest of that season of Mandalorian.
Yeah, I had a similar conversation with my father, 70 something, in at the end of the Ahsoka episode, and I walked him through Bo-Katan and Ahsoka and Cobb Vanth, and none of that was that important. And just this week, my dad sent me a text right after he watched it, and he said just saw the Book of Boba Fett episode 2, kind of long. So that was we're all saying they're not long enough. He's saying it's kind of long. And then I told him, I said the Wookiee was from the comic books, the 2 humans in the bar were from a cutscene, and his response was, quote, see, I wouldn't have gotten those, but I didn't need to. And I think he's right. So it's interesting. We have here a little bit of everything, because I knew I had seen that Wookiee somewhere. But as I've talked to you about before, I'm not a comic book fan. And I actually take issue with comic books in that, especially in this Black K character, for example, he has, in doing our little bit of research, since we didn't know who he was, he's been in comic books with Obi-Wan, with Vader, with Boba Fett, with Afra. So he's almost done too much. Yeah. And so in my opinion, he's almost done too much. I think that's one of the things the comic books do. I think like War of the Bounty Hunters is really cool, but there's way too much. Like, I feel like it's too jam-packed, but I mean, that's the way comic books run. But I think the challenge Star Wars faces is that, you know, the Marvel universe, the DC universe, they can live with overpacked storylines because they have access to alternate timelines and, you know, different universes and alternate tellings of the same story. I think the fact that everything is now canon may end up kind of, they're going to back into something. I think you were saying before you had seen some tweets about people who were upset that Black K didn't have the scar that he had in the comic book, right? That he got from Obi-Wan, right? From probably the scene right here. But you know, the live action take of this character, you know, it's similar to, you know, did Mysterio look exactly the same as he did in the comic book? He looked pretty close.
We have, you know, the issues about Ahsoka's, you know, her Leku, and, you know, all the, and I know that's the wrong word. Hera has Leku. Ahsoka has a word I'm not coming up with yet, but I want to throw a couple things to the chat. One, this is why I love having this live audience with us and folks that are smarter than I am. JD may be right. I think Snap Wexley was actually the first novel character to have a live action translation.
Yes,
because Snap was in Aftermath. Yeah. So Montrose, that's it. Thank you, Phoenix Night Flame. Her Montrose did not look the same, of course, in live action that they did in animation. Totally fair. Also, William said, where did it go? He said, whenever I'm told that people are from comics and novels, it makes me want to read more and dig deeper. Jerry said, it's a gateway to more stories with the characters if they want to learn. And that's what I
Right.
love about it.
Yep.
Disney gives you the initial thing, and then they go, if you think that's cool, here's a bunch of other stuff. But it's not required reading in order to hit what I call the big rocks, the movies and the TV shows. Everything else, that's more of like a, if you really like that one, here's a way that you can go down an even deeper rabbit hole.
Yep. Yep. I think, one of the things that was from Clone Wars, that was from Solo, that was really great to see, and I think sets
Mhm.
up a lot of things, is the Pikes and seeing them
Correct.
again. So my first response was, "Holy cow, it's the Pikes! They're back!" And then my second question was, "What are they doing on Tatooine?" And so it was really cool to see them, and as we see here in this
Well,
this
that
picture,
connects to another Twitter poll question that you put up, if I'm not mistaken.
it absolutely does. Hang on a second. So the question is, will we see Kira, because of the fact that the Pikes and Crimson Dawn were
Yep.
connected at the time of this show? Interestingly, 18.9% say no chance, which in Star Wars, nothing is no chance. I'm sorry to say,
That's
nothing
right.
is no chance.
No one's ever really gone.
Plus, I also think there's no absolutely 100%, because I mean the expectations for Book of Boba Fett have already been, I think, kind of reset for many people. But the
Sure.
50
And also, we know that only the Sith deal in absolute. So.
this is true. If we learn nothing else from the prequels, it's that only the Sith deal in absolutes. But 54% of people think it's about a 50-50 chance, and almost a quarter of people say probably, yeah, probably we're going to see her. And I think a lot of it is directly related to the fact that we saw the Pikes, and that
Mhm.
sets up. I mean, you had the twins,
Right.
the Hutts coming to lay claim. Frankly, I feel like the Nightwind assassins looked very similar to some of the Crimson Dawn uniforms that we've
Correct.
seen in comic books. My sense, and we're kind of moving into the predictions section here, but my sense is it is Kira behind a lot of this.
Mhm.
What do you think?
I think it's totally plausible, and I think that all the things fit. The little nods. I agree. I called them the parkour ninjas before they had a name, but the Prairie Wind, or not Prairie Wind, Nightwind assassins.
Prairie Wind
Um,
Assassins, they're a lot more laid back. They're kind
Prairie Wind, they're super chill. The Nightwind assassins, which is apparently an original creation for this. There does not appear to be any reporting of them anywhere else before this. If there was, it would have been comic books, and I wouldn't have known it, so it was fine. But yeah, there's a comic book panel that somebody put up last week comparing the outfits they were wearing, and while not exact, you can see how they're pretty similar.
Yep.
Somebody else said the red of the shields. That we love when we can make color things out of Star Wars.
Yep.
I love the memes that go around. I love when Star Wars is red. I love when Star Wars is Jackson said Italian American earlier this week. But there's that stuff. The Pikes is a big connecting point to it, because the outfit that Pike leader is wearing is very similar to the outfit that Kira kind of disguises herself in when they go to Kessel in the Solo movie.
Yep.
And
the one right
the
there
other
in the
comment
back, yeah.
that somebody made, I love that the masks that the Pikes wear pretty much exactly mirror their faces.
Yes.
Just with a mask, like the little metal part, so that their little whiskers can go in it. Yeah, it was fun, but I think the chances are maybe better than 50% that we get Kira in this. I think Emilia Clarke is the right age.
Yeah.
I think, we did the math earlier this week in a group text that, 15 years or so.
Yep.
It's been several years since Solo came out. And of course, so people have aged naturally, but that's not a big jump to do with makeup. It's not like we're trying to age, Harrison back down to the right age.
Yeah.
It's to go forward that way.
It's easier to age up than down.
Plus, I mean, first of all, Jennifer Beal looks great. So obviously the Twi'lek healing baths are doing their job. So maybe Kira is spending some of that big, mob leader money, staying young and taking treatments. And there's a lot of ways for it to work. And I agree with Jerry. We need more Emilia Clarke in our life. So I would be excited to see Kira show up as one of the big, because we were left not hanging with that in Solo, but a seed was clearly planted there.
Yeah.
And of course, it's being paid off in the comic books. I'm sorry to cut you off. It is being paid off in the comic books a lot of ways.
Yep.
but not everybody reads the comic book, so I think they could put a bow on it here.
But I think honestly, I think that's exactly. I'm glad you said that, because I think that's exactly part of the reason why I think it's extremely likely. I feel like as now that they've made the connection to the comics for the first time, bringing a comic book character to life, showing that, yeah, and I think it was Dan from Broaxium tweeted, comic book fans are being fed this week, and it's true.
Right.
If that's the case, if they're starting to make those connections, then I better go catch up on War of the Bounty Hunters, because I think it's gonna be very important.
Well, jumping into the chat here for
yeah.
a second, our own Lando Calrissian, Chris Ryans himself
he is.
said, "I hope Kira shows up." Framey had another great point. Didn't Shizor recently become part of new canon? Plenty of crime to go around with Fett claiming his chunk of the action. Matt Harrington, I love Matt, and Matt gets a shout out for this because he's been tweeting it from the beginning. He said, "You guys can take any character you want showing up, but I 100% guarantee it will be Harrison as a deep fake Han." He's calling his shot. So,
all right,
I would take a big odds over under prop bet on that one.
DM us, Matt. We'll figure
That's
out.
Right. Let's get some Vegas going on that one.
Let's get something going on that. Yeah, it's interesting. Shizor, I think. So I think what's really interesting too, and something to keep in mind, is that in one of the recent articles before Book of Boba Fett came out, we heard that the only thing we've seen so far was from the first episode. Well, now we know it's probably from the first 3 episodes, right? Space Botox, that's great,
right.
Brian. So the second half of the season is going to be just, they haven't shown us anything from the second half of the season. And I mean, I feel like the Hutts showing up, first of all, gotta say, I don't think the Hutts have looked that good since real world Jabba from Return of the Jedi. I never felt like the digital Hutts were able to pull it off, but these guys were so good.
These were good Hutts. And I will say, for as much talk and as many times, if we were playing a drinking game on the amount of times we heard the word litter in the first 2 episodes of this show, this litter right here, whoever built that is worth every penny that they've gotten, because this shot shows it some, but there's another wide shot where they're looking down that street, and that thing is bowed under, and the people holding it are struggling. And I loved so much about how they put those little details into it. But we get Hutts, Pete. We got Hutts.
We got Hutts and Pikes in this episode. It's really remarkable.
Pikes. We get a comic character. Like, everybody's being fed this week.
And on top of that, you also had this really interesting, and I don't think a lot of people, I haven't seen much talk about it. I mean, look, I was wrong on the mayor. I'm going to admit it. I was
also wrong on the mayor.
I believed that this was not really the mayor. I thought it was a misdirect. But I do believe that the biggest breadcrumb they left was when Fennec said, if you want to kill him, we have to get permission. Yes. Not a lot of people have talked about that, and maybe I'm just missing it. Maybe I'm getting too involved in stupid arguments on Twitter, but not a lot of people have spoken about that. And honestly, that's big. So, first of all, they're considering it, right?
Yeah,
Fennec wants to kill anybody who gives Boba any shit, but Boba's like, he like the question is being pondered, which means who do they need permission from? And that's where we are.
Well, and I saw. And I am not as familiar, because we get the drop of Nal Hutta, which was an Easter egg. And he said, the twins are busy with the debauchery on Nal Hutta. We get Nal Hutta in the Clone Wars. And I've watched those episodes, but probably only once. And it's been a long time. But there's a Hutt council. And what I saw today actually was the Nerdist video that Dan Casey did. And he kind of went through the Easter eggs for this episode. And at one point when that came up, they cut to a scene of like a Hutt council, which also felt like the council that Sam Jackson goes to in the Marvel movies. Kind of everybody spread around. Is that who he has to go get permission from? But that's planning, that contact or conflict. I do want to bring up, and this is maybe not an Easter egg, and I tweeted it out earlier this week, but Fanboy Cantina brought it up. Mayor Mokshays.
Yes.
Star Wars is nothing if not Tuckerization of names. And if Mayor Mock Shays is not Mayor McCheese, I will eat my Boba Fett hat because this is too good. And I did ask Pablo and I asked Matt Martin for comment on it. And so far we have not gotten any word back, but it has to be Mayor Mock Shays.
That came from Scott
Mayor
Rifen.
McCheese the rest of the time. Yeah,
Scott Rifen posted that. And and then when I watched the episode again last night, I heard McCheese. That's what I heard. Yep. It was Mayor McCheese at that moment moving forward.
Well, and just as another nod in that one scene with the mayor, we got something that we had only ever gotten in animation, which is the Ithorian with the translator, which I thought was really neat. You see it in that picture, and you get, when you're watching it on screen, you get the dual thing. You hear the Ithorian voice in the background, and then you hear what we found out was Robert Rodriguez doing the Galactic Basic translation over the top of it.
Yep.
And that was a fun little nod because we saw a ton of that in Rebels. At least that's where I remember seeing that.
Yeah.
But the only Ithorian we got before that in, the OT was in Mos Eisley Cantina, and it was just Ithorian speak. So, yeah, Chris, you're welcome. Mayor McCheese, McCheese.
Yep, McCheese.
All we need now is Sam Jackson saying, it's French for Mayor McCheese.
Yes, I honestly, that's got to be what it is. I mean, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant. Oh, good point, Andy. The Tartakovsky Clone Wars introduced that translator concept. Yeah,
that's right. I'm much less familiar with that, so I do bow to your knowledge.
I love that they keep the sound that you now when you watch A New Hope, you hear it.
Right.
You actually hear that the tone that they use.
That guttural kind of whatever.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could go for days. I do want to bring up one catch that you saw on Twitter that I think is worth mentioning, because I think one of the things, there's been a lot of talk about some of the choreography of some of the fights that hasn't been great. And honestly, when I watched episode 1 again, the fight between Boba and the female warrior, this is the first time I felt like I could tell it was done with the what do they call it?
The volume.
The volume. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was thinking the vision. I knew it wasn't the vision. I think some of it, and look, Tamura Morrison's 61 years old. He's not.
And I have a comment about Tamura, and it's critical in the best possible way. But we see those things like when Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out. Like, Harrison's there. Honestly, that movie is better than we give it credit for, other than a couple of bad. Honestly, the worst part is the CGI swinging through the trees. That's not Harrison. That's what's his name. But there's a point when you realize, with an athlete or somebody who, the comment years ago about Willie Mays in the outfield when he was a little bit past his prime and circling a fly ball. Tamura Morrison running and in the sand and wearing those pointy shoes, Tamura Morrison running in that jumpsuit looks like any of my kids when they were babies running away from me with a dirty diaper. That's that running thing that it's not quite working, but it's fantastic. And I don't care because I'm not being ugly critical. I'm just going, that one didn't hold up as much as some of the others.
Yeah. Well, there was a scene in this one very similar to, and it was one of those things that I loved when I saw it revealed from the episode of Mandalorian that was the second season that was directed by Ron Howard's daughter, and I feel horrible that I can't remember her name right now.
Bryce Dallas Howard.
Bryce Dallas, thank you. Where she did
Apollo 13.
Yeah, the Apollo 13 shot for shot. And then what you found on Twitter was this shot of when the Tuskens go after the downed train from Lawrence of Arabia. If you haven't seen this and you're seeing this right now on the video, I will put it in the links to the audio version of the show. It's remarkable and it's brilliant, and it brings to life just that what they were trying to do, because this is from the painting.
Yes, and it's such a classic Star Wars. Star Wars is nothing if not homage.
Right.
Star Wars is, I've said on my show 100 million times, my favorite television show of all time is The West Wing.
Right.
And there's a great line in The West Wing in one of the episodes where Rob Lowe's character writes a speech for President Bartlett. And at the end of it, one of the other characters is talking to Rob Lowe about the speech and this line that he gave. And Rob Lowe uses the line, he says, "Good writers borrow from other writers. Great writers steal from them outright." And that has always stuck with me because George Lucas himself borrowed from Kurosawa, borrowed from spaghetti westerns, borrowed from all of these things that have really, honestly, he brought them more to the public for than they were
Right.
prior to that. Like
Yep.
he gave, there's a great story that came out around the time of Visions about how Kurosawa's life was so impacted by George Lucas basically paying homage and opening the doors to more people to discovering him.
Yep.
And you get that with Favreau and Filoni because one, Filoni studied at Lucas's feet.
Yep.
I think, and I've said this before, I think Favreau might be our modern day George Lucas.
100%.
He's a great storytelling. He has a great storyteller. He has an eye towards technology and advancing how they tell these stories.
Yep.
And so to give nods to Lawrence of Arabia, and Robert Rodriguez is a part of this too. And let's not also overlook Steph Green that directed this episode.
Yes, 100%. Yep.
Like the stuff she's directed is not insignificant. But like the homage to things like Lawrence of Arabia to pull up these great moments. The other one that we talked about before we went on the air, Dean Cundy, who was the director of photography for this episode.
Mm-hmm.
I encourage anybody that's watching this or listening to this later, go to IMDb and look up Dean Cundy, Cundey. Look at his resume of the things that he was director of photography on, all the Back to the Futures. I mean, that's just the ones I can remember off the top of my head. And that's who shot this episode. And that's why it looks the way it does. But that shot, when I saw it on Twitter, just blew my mind.
It's really wild. And again, it's just it brings it to life. I'm not even going to go into the people saying that there shouldn't be a train because clearly, and look, I'm also going to say this. This is another breadcrumb for Kira. There was a train in Solo. There's a train in this. It's like I feel like there's that direct connection. So, so listen, as we're coming up to close to the top of the hour here. First of all, thank you to everybody for hanging out with us tonight. We are going to do this every single Friday, as long as there's a Disney Plus Star Wars series. We may end up doing a couple between the series, but 2022 has so much in store for us coming up. And you also can listen to this episode in our podcast stream. We were just talking about it coming up. We're gonna put this in the podcast stream on Mondays, so you can go and you can get prepared for the upcoming episode. And when we do the predictions in a moment, you'll see just how wrong we were. Thursdays, you're going to catch our interview show. And this week it's going to be Kyle Katarn, who is a YouTuber and a fan film expert. And the guy is a Mandalorian expert. Had a ton of fun talking to him. And then of course, Saturdays, you're still going to get your Disturbances in the Force, which we're going to drop on Saturday mornings just to keep you up to date on all the Star Wars news. But Nick, we are looking at chapter 3 coming up just a couple days from now. Where do you think it's going? What can we expect in your mind from this episode? And then I'll give my thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I have a specific guess for chapter 3 in particular. I feel like the things I said to you before we came on, I think like for the time being, maybe for the next 3 episodes, because we've got 5 left. Maybe for the next 3 episodes, I think we see less of the Tusken arc. I think we kind of put a bow on that for the time being.
Yep.
I think the next 3, and Matt said this earlier in the chat, I don't know where it is, but he said, he's ready for more of the present day, quote unquote, Boba, the flashbacks. I think the next 3 episodes, certainly starting with this week, are going to deal with more of his present conflict, the Hutts.
Yep.
What's going on with maybe holding on to that power. I really think they planted a seed with the mayor offering his piece of tribute, which was the advice of saying being the head of a family, which again, all of us immediately thought about The Godfather.
Exactly.
I think that sets the scene for maybe the next couple of episodes. And so that may be the more present drama. I think the Tuskens will show up in the last 2 episodes again. And I have some thoughts. You and I did Around the Galaxy right before Christmas.
Yep.
We did a bunch of predictions. I made a big one. I have pivoted to maybe like a 1A, 1B on that prediction.
Yeah.
For the end of the series, but we'll get to that, in a couple weeks. So I think my biggest prediction for this next week is less flashbacks. I think we're going to get a little bit more like maybe even the full episode in the present day, which would be interesting. Just thinking about other recent modern storytelling has a Game of Thrones vibe. Game of Thrones would spend certain episodes jumping from place to place to place, but every now and then you had an episode that was entirely set at, at the wall. That episode or Battle of the Bastards all took place in that one place. It didn't jump around. Right. I could see us having a next episode of all here, all in the present, something like that.
This is why I love doing the show with you, because I am slightly on the other side. I think we are going to. I think the whole. At first, I was of the mind as well that we were going to kind of move away from the flashbacks and spend more time in the present. I think because it's called the Book of Boba Fett, and because they've done such a great job of literally creating a video book of the style that they share, I think we're going to see in this upcoming episode, I think we're going to see him rescue Fennec and go and steal his ship from Jabba the Hutt's palace. I think I think our cameo character this episode is going to be Jabba the Hutt. I think we're going to see him come in this, and I think it's going to be them stealing the ship, because we know that at some point he rescued Fennec, and then he got the ship before he got his armor, so he's still going to be Tusken Boba,
right? Absolutely, with the ship,
with the ship. So I think that's what we're going to get with this one. And I think it's going to be less flashback, though. I think it's going to be 50% versus.
Well, and that was one of the trailer things we got, and it wasn't in one of the main trailers, but it was in one of the TV spots. We get the shot of him and Fennec on the top of the hill, kind of looking down towards Boba's palace. But then there's the one in the hangar where the ship is sitting there.
Quick shot, and if you pause it, you can see the ship.
Which video game is it a mirror of? Because that image came out as well.
Oh, it came from Battlefront 2 when they
Battlefront 2. Okay.
Yep.
So there's a mirror image of that. So I think you're exactly right. That's a great way to go. And it also plays with two things I saw in the comments earlier. I think Framey said the timeline is still a little bit convoluted. We still have a little bit of, we think we're here, and we think the flashbacks are here, but you said it exactly right. At this point, he has his gaffy stick, he has his Tusken robes and wrappings, but we know he gets the ship before he gets the armor. So we still have some play at work there.
Yeah, we're still building the character that we got to today. And it was interesting, in rewatching episode 1, how it almost teased that we were about to see the scene again from Mandalorian by showing sort of the interior of the palace and different things there. One last question for you as it relates to predictions. They have made a very deliberate cut to multiple times to young Boba and to Camino. Do you think we're going to get any sort of depth there, or do you think that's just sort of a nod to where he came from? I mean, as I tweeted, he was born on an oceanic planet and he was reborn on a desert planet. Do you think that's what it is?
Or used to be an oceanic planet, which is also interesting.
That was an interesting little.
I love that historical drop. And in connection to your question, I do want to bring up this question or this comment from William Hardy. William, who's a good friend of the Bombad cast, he said Boba needs to stop sleeping and go to therapy. Boba is working. Boba's working things out, and we see that with the Vision Quest, the peyote lizard, as we're calling it.
Yep.
He's working that stuff out. So tying into your question, I think we certainly could get another reused shot or maybe a deleted shot from one of the prequels of young Boba, young Daniel Logan. I'll be honest, I think there's the potential before this is over with to see actual Daniel Logan as an in-between era Boba tied to a Clone Wars something, some other flashback moment, some other thing. Of course, people are begging for Omega. We have, there's a lot of pieces there, but I think that we could get something else that ties to Boba's childhood, because this is what we know. Boba, and to go back to also at the beginning of the show, my comments about an emotionally developed Boba, we have Boba Fett dealing with trauma.
Right.
Childhood trauma. Those shots were very intentional of, Boba Fett's starship, or Jango Fett at the time, starship flying away and him watching out the window and putting his hand up.
Yep.
as a part of that vision quest. Like, this is somebody who's dealing with being left. This is a person who's dealing with, and that's why I think favorite Star Wars trope of mine, found family.
Yep.
Boba finds his family at the end of this episode in the Tuscans and in this tribe.
Yep.
But I think we could get some more of that. I think that's a way too long way of answering your question.
No such thing as too long, Nick. That's just fine. No, I think it's. I think we're going to see some more connections. I think you're right. It is really. It's interesting. It's just these little subtle thing. I've said it 1,000 times. Dave Filoni does not waste a frame.
That's
and
right.
So
no filler.
No filler at all. You can't spell filler without Filoni, but you can, you don't need it, filler. But watch that. Again, these little cuts, these little things that you notice the second time around. When you watch it, it glazes over and you catch it. But when you watch it the second time, when he's running, sort of watching the ship take off, like he's left alone again. And what we know from the Clone Wars is he didn't have friends that were clones. He was his only family was Taunwi and Jango Fett. That was it. But we don't know what the Omega connection was, and that's an interesting.
Let me ask you a very nuts and bolts question as we're getting towards the end here. First watch, when a new episode of anything drops, do you first watch it just to consume it, or when you watch it the first time, are you already trying to think about deep cuts, or do you save that for us? That's hard because obviously we can only control so much of where our brain runs as we see things, but I'm fascinated by the process, and certainly people who know way more about Star Wars and the deep canon and things like that, or even people who have Star Wars jobs, can they watch a first episode of something new and go, holy crap, that was fun, and then the second time they watch it, I'm more likely to watch it a second time with a pad and a pen.
Yeah.
But the first time, I really do even try not to have my phone and not get distracted and just go, let me take in this first one. What is your Pete process?
Yeah. My process is I set an alarm and I watch it early in the morning before anybody wakes up.
That's Twitter self-defense, right?
That's exactly where I was going with it. I watch it so that I make sure that I can't be spoiled. I don't watch it. I don't pick up the phone. I don't do anything. I just go straight to watching the episode. And then, and sometimes, honestly, there were a handful of Mando episodes that I only watched once because I got enough of the analysis from either being on shows, talking to people, or reading the Twitter analysis.
Sure.
But I don't know. There's something about this show that makes me want to watch the episode again pretty quickly, and I really want to dig into it. And I think it's because the way it's shot, and I think it's the way it's, there's not a lot of words. So far, the show has not been expository from a dialogue standpoint. It's been very much showing you the story, which is so different for the way stories are told now. So.
Absolutely. I like this one from Brandon, Apprentice Ewok. Watch to consume, watch with headphones in a dark room, then watch to see Easter eggs is my process. And I love that. I love the idea of isolating.
Yep.
You said not looking at your phone when a new thing drops, especially because of a certain group text that I'm in with 3 of my greatest Star Wars podcasting friends. When I get up on Wednesday morning, and my process is the first episode I did stay up, but this week I got up and watched it at 5:30. I'm on Central Time because my oldest daughter is my Star Wars person. So I wake her up before school, and she and I make a cup of coffee and we watch it together before we have to get everybody else up and ready for school. So that's one special because she and I have that moment to be together. But when I get up on those moments, I don't flip my phone over because Pete's an hour ahead of me, and you usually have seen it by the time I've gotten to it.
This is true.
But I like that, Brandon. That's a great way to go.
So, well, that is great. Well, hey, I think that kind of wraps it up for the first return episode of Streaming Star Wars. Nick, how'd you feel about it? How'd it go? What did you think?
I had a blast, and I'm ready for it to be next Friday. Actually, I'm ready for it to be next Wednesday so we can get episode 3. And then I'm ready for it to be next Friday so we can turn around and do this again. And I do want to throw another shout out to the chat. There's too many of you to name, so thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this. This is why we love doing this show, is your commentary, your feedback, even if it's about my beard. It's important and it's valuable, and we're just glad for y'all to be here. So thanks for hanging out, and we can't wait to hang out and do this again with you guys next Friday.
Absolutely. And hey, if you are wanted to just sort of revisit the fact that Around the Galaxy and Podcast the Wills are now together on the ATG Cast stream. And if you become a patron, I hate to do the pitch, but I'm going to do it. If you become a patron, you also get to join Nick and his guests and his guest list. I'm not going to reveal it, but he's got some amazing guests coming up. You're going to want to be a part of those conversations. And so for as little as $3 a month, you can be in those shows. We are also, Nick and I are working out the details. We are going to make it so that patrons can be literally a part of streaming Star Wars on Friday
Absolutely.
nights, hanging out with us. We're figuring out the details. But if you're interested in being a patron, just go to patreon.com/ATGcast or go to atgcast.com and you'll find a link there. Also, if you're digging the cool little logo in the upper right-hand corner with the different heads, we've designed some t-shirts, which you can check out. People call me a Disney shill, but I'm a horrible ATG cast shill. I'm not good at that, but it's one of those things where if you dig it and you want to support the show, that would be fantastic.
Well, and I'm going to cut you off for just a half a second.
Please
Pete's
do.
being a little more humble because Pete has a dramatic, awesome amount of design skills, graphic skills. We have gone back and forth this week, and every time he thought, okay, that's the last one, he's made another one. And if you've noticed in the top right corner of your screen, that live logo, which is currently an R2 unit, there's is there 10 of them, 9 or 10 of them at this point?
Yeah, I think something like that. Yeah.
There's Boba, there's Maul, there's a Tusken, there's a Hutt, there's R2, there's Boba, there's Andor, there's Ahsoka. There's so many, and they're all available on TeePublic. They're all available as t-shirts. We'd love for you to grab your favorite one, favorite color, whatever it is. But Pete has done a great job putting those together, and we'll get the link out for that after the show. If you have a favorite character, there's probably a logo for it, just like that with streaming Star Wars on it. So we want you to check it out.
Absolutely. Well, Nick, this has been a blast. I look forward to talking to you next week. Of course, I'll be talking to you way before then, but this has been great. Next Friday, the 14th, we will be reviewing episode chapter 3. Cheers, my friend.
Final cheers to everybody.